Imagine this. You are standing in a kitchen as large as a banquet hall inside a penthouse at Ashford Heights on the evening of December 24th. Outside, more than 20 people are laughing under warm golden lights. Wine glasses clink softly. Christmas music drifts through every corner of the house. A Christmas tree nearly touching the ceiling stands perfectly decorated, like something from a magazine photo. White tablecloths, scented candles, crystal glasses, polished silver. If anyone looked in through the windows, they would think this was the picture of a perfect family. And you? You are wearing an apron. Flour clings to your hands. Your shoulders ache from carrying trays of food since 3 in the afternoon. Your hair is hastily tied at the back of your neck. Then your mother walks into the kitchen, looks at the still empty oven, and asks lightly, "Emma, it's only 26 people. What are you waiting for? Why haven't you started the main course yet?" That's me, Emma Carter. And that night, the one thing my entire family was absolutely certain of was this. I would obediently stay in that kitchen, just as I had for the past 15 years. But they didn't know something. In less than 12 hours, I would be signing a contract that could completely change my company. In the black handbag sitting on the bar stool outside, I had already packed my passport, my laptop, a charcoal suit, and a one-way plane ticket to Seabrook. That Christmas night, the thing I left behind was not just an uncooked turkey. I also left behind the role of the good daughter, the unpaid server, the shadow in the Carter family. My mother, Elaine Carter, had a special talent. She could turn commands into something that sounded almost like affection. Emma, set the table. Emma, taste the sauce. Emma, polish the crystal glasses again. Emma, hurry up in the kitchen. Olivia needs to greet the guests. It was never, "Could you help me, Emma?" There was always a cold assumption that the heaviest, most invisible work naturally belonged to me. That night it wasn't just my family there. There was Daniel Carter, my younger brother, the one who had always been the center of every holiday. There was Daniel's fiancée, Olivia Bennett, in her expensive red dress and perfect smile. There were Olivia's parents, Jonathan Bennett and Eleanor Bennett, a family well known in the hotel investment world. And most importantly, there was a very special guest that evening, Evelyn Moore, the powerful businesswoman who ran North Star Aviation. The woman my father, Victor Carter, desperately wanted to impress in order to secure a partnership deal. Of course, my mother didn't call it a business opportunity. She called it a warm family dinner. Just like she used to call the times I cooked for 15 or 20 people. Just a little help for the family. I stood at the sink, staring at the untouched turkey still sitting in the refrigerator. Then I looked at my reflection in the oven door. A woman who looked far too calm, and that was the dangerous sign. Because when you are still angry, it means you still hope things might change. But when you become calm to the point of coldness, it means something inside you has finally ended. My mother stepped closer. "Emma, the guests will arrive in 40 minutes. Olivia has to be out there. Daniel is talking to Jonathan. Your father is entertaining business partners. You're the only one who's free. Hurry up. You're the only one who's free." I had heard that sentence for nearly half my life. When I was 22 and sending job applications, I was free. When I was 25 and working until midnight building my company, I was free. When I was 32 and had just closed a 6-figure deal, I was still free whenever I came home for the holidays. Daniel, even when holding a whiskey in the living room, was always busy. Olivia, even when adjusting her lipstick, was always busy. And me? I existed to fill the gaps. "Did you hear me?" Elaine asked. "I heard you, then start cooking." I looked straight at her. Then I said something that even surprised me with how calm my voice sounded. "No." She blinked. "What?" "I'm not cooking tonight." The air in the kitchen froze. My mother laughed faintly. "Don't start this today, Emma." "I'm not starting anything. I'm just telling you I won't cook. You know how important tonight is." "I do. Evelyn Moore is coming." "I know. And you're going to embarrass your mother like this?" I looked at her. "You've embarrassed me in front of this family for 15 years. Right then, my father walked into the kitchen. Victor Carter always appeared like a judge who had already decided the verdict. "What's going on?" Elaine turned toward him. "Your daughter has decided to throw a tantrum tonight." My father glanced at the apron I was wearing. "Emma, don't cause trouble. Tonight isn't about you." Of course it wasn't. In the Carter family, Nothing had ever been about me. I removed my cooking gloves. I'm not causing trouble, I'm simply not cooking anymore. Why? My father asked. Because of 15 years. The kitchen fell silent. Since I was 22, I said slowly. Whenever the family needed someone in the kitchen, it was me. Whenever someone needed to clean, it was me. Whenever someone had to sacrifice their own plans, it was me. Daniel had appeared in the doorway. You're overreacting again, he said. It's just one dinner. I looked at my brother. Have you ever cooked a dinner for this family, Daniel? Daniel didn't answer. Olivia stepped in. Emma, no one forced you to sacrifice like that. I looked at her. No one forced me. They simply built a system where if I refused, I would be called selfish. I untied my apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. I have to go. Elaine laughed. Go where? Tonight? To the airport. Emma, are you insane? No. For the first time in a very long time, I'm completely clear-headed. Where are you going on Christmas Eve? To Seabrook. My father frowned. Your little fairs and events can't be more important than tonight. I looked at him. Then I said something I had hidden for years. Tomorrow at 11 in the morning, I have a meeting with Evelyn Moore to sign a contract to organize North Star Aviation's event series at the Grand Marlow Hotel. The contract is worth $2.8 million. The kitchen went silent. Daniel laughed first. What did you just say? I said. I repeated calmly. I have a real company. And tomorrow morning I'm meeting Evelyn Moore. Elaine crossed her arms. Emma, you don't have to make things up just to avoid helping. Strangely, that sentence didn't hurt me anymore. I picked up my handbag. My father stepped in front of the door. If you walk out of this house tonight, don't expect to come back as if nothing happened. I looked at him. I don't want things to be the same anymore. Then I walked past him. As I crossed the living room, the conversation slowed. People looked at me. The apron was gone. My handbag hung from my shoulder. Olivia stood beside the Christmas tree, eyes wide. Jonathan Bennett stopped speaking mid-sentence. Eleanor Bennett tightened her grip on her wine glass. And in that moment, I suddenly remembered Grandma Jasmine Carter. The only person who had ever told me, years ago, in the small kitchen in Willow Creek, Emma, cooking is love when it is given freely. But when people assume you must serve them, it stops being love. That Christmas night, I finally understood those words completely. I turned back one last time. Have a wonderful evening. No one answered. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. And I knew that one chapter of my life had just ended. If you have ever been the person always pushed into the quietest, most invisible role inside your own family, you will understand this. Some moments look very small, but they are actually the moment when a person is born a second time. And my family still didn't know something. The woman they were trying so hard to impress that night was the same woman who would sign my future the next morning. In truth, the night I walked out of the penthouse at Ashford Heights was not the night everything began. It was only the night everything finally broke open. The truth had been building quietly, drop by drop, like water slowly seeping into a wall, for 15 years before that. The first Christmas I became the family's default person in the kitchen. I was 21 years old. I had just finished college. I didn't have a stable job yet. I was living temporarily at my family's old house in Maple Grove, sending applications everywhere and waiting for the rare reply in a bleak job market. I still remember the smell in the house that day. Pine, cinnamon, vanilla candles. My mother had placed angel figurines along the staircase. My father hung a wreath on the front door as if decorating the house beautifully would somehow make the family inside it kind. Around 4 in the afternoon, I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop open, halfway through writing a job application, when Elaine walked over and said, Emma, you handle dinner tonight. We'll have 14 people. She didn't ask. She didn't discuss it. It was simply an announcement. I looked up. I have to submit this application before 6. That can wait. But Daniel is busy. Busy doing what? Lying on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. But in my mother's dictionary, everything Daniel did was always more important than anything I did. That night, I stayed in the kitchen until the guests arrived. I clearly remember the moment Jonathan Bennett, who at that time was only a business associate of my father, walked past the kitchen, glanced at the tray of pastries I had just taken out of the oven, and asked, Who made those? They look amazing. My mother answered quickly, Oh, Emma, she's home, so she has time to do things like that. She has time. Just 4 words. But they were enough to erase an entire person's effort. Not talent. Not care. Just time. From that moment on, the pattern was set. Every holiday was the same. I stood in the kitchen. Daniel stood in the spotlight. My father introduced him as the one who would inherit the family legacy. My mother presented him to guests like a profitable investment, and I carried the food I had cooked to the table, then stepped back like a piece of furniture. Years later, I realized something. They probably knew I was hurting, but because they benefited from my silence, they chose not to see it. At 24, I started taking small event organizing jobs, children's birthday parties, store openings, local workshops, the kind of work my family described with a faint smile as little decorating jobs. But those jobs taught me things no school ever could. How to read a room, how to anticipate a crisis, how to make a chaotic evening appear perfectly controlled, how to work in situations where people only see the finished result. I learned all of those things first in my family's kitchen. The irony was almost cruel. The place that diminished me the most was the place that trained the skills that would eventually sustain my life. The first person who noticed that wasn't my parents. It was Grandma Jasmine. At the time, she was still living in her small house in Willow Creek, planting flowers behind the porch in the mornings and reading by the window in the afternoons. One evening, after I had just finished preparing food for nearly 20 people, I drove out to visit her. She poured tea for me and asked gently, "So you did everything again this time?" I gave a tired smile. I wasn't forced. It's just, no one else would do it. She looked at me for a long time. "Emma, do you know what the most frightening thing about unfairness is?" I shook my head. It rarely begins with violence. It begins when people make you believe that the losing side should always be yours. I never forgot those words. It just took me many years to gather the courage to live by them. My company was born quietly. No launch party. No loud announcement. The company was called Brook Hollow Hospitality. At first, it was just me, an old laptop, and a spreadsheet filled with expenses. Then the first client came. Then the second. Then referrals. Then larger contracts. Then the first employee. Then a small office in Seabrook. Then a team of 3. Then 5. Then 12. By 2024, I had 3 department heads I trusted completely. Mila handled operations. Noah managed partnerships and logistics. Hannah led experience design and creativity. And the person who stood beside me during the hardest phases was Adrian Cole. Adrian wasn't my boyfriend, as some people like to speculate. He was my partner, the steady voice of reason whenever I began to doubt myself. One day he asked me, "Why don't you ever tell your family about this?" I answered honestly, "Because I'm tired of bringing the most valuable thing in my life to people who only try to make it smaller." Adrian looked at me and said, "Then stop bringing it to them. Just keep building until they no longer have the power to define you." On the morning of December 23, Adrian walked into my office in Seabrook holding a tablet. "Emma, you need to see this." An email appeared on the screen. Strategic Hospitality Partnership. North Star Aviation. Sender: Evelyn Moore. North Star wanted Brook Hollow Hospitality to become the exclusive partner for their strategic event series. One of the key venues would be the Grand Marlowe Hotel. Projected contract value: $2.8 million. I looked up. "Is this real?" Adrian nodded. "It's real. But there's one condition." "What is it?" "Evelyn Moore wants to meet you in person before signing." "When?" Adrian paused for a second. 11 in the morning. December 24. I immediately understood the problem. That was the morning after Christmas Eve. And my family had already assumed that on the evening of the 24th I would be in their kitchen from early afternoon. Just then my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Call me back immediately. Important." I called her. Elaine spoke without greeting. "Emma, tomorrow night there will be 26 people. You need to come early." "I can't." "Don't start." "I have a work meeting." "What kind of meeting happens on Christmas Eve?" "I'm meeting Evelyn Moore on the morning of the 24th. I thought saying her name might make my mother pause. Instead, she laughed. "Your little decorating events cannot be more important than family." I closed my eyes. "This isn't a decorating event. It's a $2.8 million contract." Elaine laughed coldly. "Emma, you're 36 years old. Don't make up stories like a child just to get out of helping. Strangely, I didn't cry. I simply felt something inside me go quiet. Tomorrow, I'm not coming to cook. The line went silent. Then she said, if you abandon your family during the holidays, don't blame us when nothing is the same afterward. I looked out the window. The sea in Seabrook was gray and wide. I don't want things to be the same anymore. Then I hung up. That evening, before going to the airport, I stopped by Rosehaven Senior Living to see Grandma Jasmine. She was sitting near the window, knitting a wool scarf. When she saw me, she smiled. You have the eyes of someone about to do something important. I told her about the contract, about Evelyn Moore, about the call with my mother. She listened quietly, then patted my hand. So you're finally tired of carrying other people's indifference. I feel guilty, I admitted. Because you're kind, she said. But feeling guilty doesn't mean you're wrong. Before I left, she pulled me closer and said, when you sign that contract tomorrow, don't sign it like a daughter trying to prove something to someone. Sign it like a woman who knows she deserves it. On the morning of the 24th, I walked into the lobby of the Grand Marlowe Hotel. In my charcoal suit, my back straight. Evelyn Moore was already waiting in the conference room. She was in her 50s, with short silver hair and sharp but calm eyes. 45 minutes later, we had gone through every difficult question. 11th E22A. Both sides signed. The pen in my hand touched the paper, and I heard Grandma Jasmine's voice in my mind. Sign like a woman who knows she deserves it. So I signed. Evelyn smiled. Welcome to North Star. Her assistant photographed our handshake. Then Evelyn said casually, tonight I'm flying into the city for a Christmas dinner with the Bennett and Carter families. They say they host beautifully every year. I looked up. A dinner with the Carter family? Yes, Victor Carter invited me. I hear the food is wonderful. For a moment, I could almost see the empty kitchen at Ashford Heights. I could see my mother still believing I would return at the last minute. I kept my expression calm. I hope you have a memorable evening. Evelyn studied me. You know that family? I smiled slightly. Yes, I though. And that was all I said. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not revealing the truth immediately. Sometimes the greatest victory is remaining silent long enough for the truth to walk into the room on its own and stand under the lights. That night, when Evelyn Moore stepped into my family's apartment and saw what was waiting on the dining table, the masks would begin to fall. And the first person to expose the Carter family would not be me. I was not at the Ashford Heights penthouse when my family's Christmas dinner collapsed. And that was the most revealing part of all. Because many people believe the truth only carries weight when the wounded person is standing there, accusing everyone. Some truths are stronger than that. They only need the right moment, the right room, and the right witnesses. On the evening of December 24, while I was sitting alone on a hotel balcony in Seabrook with a steak slowly going cold, a glass of red wine, and the North Star contract lying beside my hand, chaos began at Ashford Heights around 5:20 p.m. Later, I pieced the whole thing together from different sources. Part of it came from Eleanor Bennett, part from Jonathan Bennett, and the rest came from the dozens of missed calls and frantic messages from my family. At around 5:20, my mother walked into the kitchen and was finally forced to face what she had refused to believe all afternoon. I was not coming back. No appetizer trays. No soup simmering. No roast. No pie. Just a beautifully decorated kitchen that had become completely meaningless. At first, my father stayed calm. He called restaurants. He called catering services. He called a private chef who had once worked for the Bennetts. Every one of them was booked or refused because it was too late on Christmas Eve. Daniel got angry. Olivia went pale, then almost immediately shifted into worrying about appearances. Tonight cannot fail, she told Elaine. My mother Eleanor will notice everything. Not, is Emma okay? Not, did she really leave? Just, tonight cannot fail. By 6 o'clock, the only solution my family had was to rush out and buy cold platters, packaged roast meat, pre-mixed salads, packaged bread, and a cheese tray arranged on porcelain plates so it would look less pathetic. Everything was laid out beneath candlelight and pine branches like a performance trying desperately to save itself. The guests began to arrive. Doorbells ringing. Greetings. Compliments about the Christmas tree. The clinking of glasses. And behind it all was a thin layer of tension, delicate as glass. Jonathan Bennett was the first to realize something was wrong. He stepped into the dining room, looked at the table that had been beautifully arranged, but was obviously inadequate, then turned to Victor. I thought Elaine said tonight was supposed to be a formal seated dinner. Victor answered immediately, his smile stiff as wood. There were some last-minute changes, but Eleanor was sharper. She walked through the kitchen, looked at the refrigerator, looked at the cold oven, looked at the signs of unfinished preparation. Then she came back out without saying a word. That was when everything truly began to show. This was not a last-minute change. This was a collapse. Olivia moved from one group of guests to another, trying to patch over the cracks with her smile. Daniel talked more than usual. People who feel insecure often raise their voices to hide the emptiness. Then, at 7:10, Evelyn Moore arrived. Evelyn stepped into the room with the kind of presence that made introductions unnecessary. Elaine almost rushed toward her. Evelyn, what an honor to have you here. Victor shook her hand firmly. Jonathan Bennett smiled politely. Daniel immediately slipped into the role of the energetic heir. Olivia stood beside him like a perfectly composed photograph. Everything was staged as well as it possibly could be. There was just one problem. The dinner wasn't real. Evelyn realized that very quickly. She glanced at the table, at the cold cuts hastily transferred to serving dishes, at the bread still holding the shape of its packaging, at the food that lacked the depth and warmth of a meal actually cooked at home. She said nothing. She remained polite. And that was what made it even more embarrassing. At around 7:35, Jonathan Bennett's phone buzzed. He looked down. A LinkedIn post from North Star Aviation was spreading quickly. In the photo, Evelyn Moore was shaking hands with a woman in a charcoal suit in front of the Grand Marlowe Hotel logo. The caption clearly said, North Star Aviation welcomes Brook Hollow Hospitality and CEO Emma Carter as its strategic partner for the coming year. Jonathan frowned. Read it again. Then slowly looked up. Emma Carter? The name dropped into the room so clearly it seemed to ring in the air. Eleanor stepped closer. What? Jonathan turned the phone toward her. Eleanor read it, then looked straight at Victor. This Emma Carter? Before my father could answer, Evelyn turned around. Emma Carter? She said, then smiled faintly. The atmosphere changed instantly. My mother froze. Daniel looked from Evelyn to the phone as if he still couldn't process what he was hearing. Olivia blinked rapidly. Victor asked, his voice slightly rough. I'm sorry. Which Emma Carter? Evelyn answered calmly. Emma Carter, CEO of Brook Hollow Hospitality. She paused for a beat, then added, the woman who signed a $2.8 million contract with North Star this morning. The whole room went silent. Eleanor Bennett was the first to react. Wait, Emma, your daughter, is a CEO? Victor still hadn't recovered from the shock. I didn't. My mother jumped in too quickly. Emma does a few event projects here and there, but… No, Evelyn cut in. Very polite but very firm. Not a few little event projects. Her company has a very strong structure. I reviewed the operating data, the client portfolio, and the growth strategy. She's extremely impressive. Jonathan Bennett scrolled farther down the post. It says her company has 31 employees. Eleanor added, and over $5 million in revenue this year. Daniel blurted out, That's impossible. Evelyn turned toward him. It's possible. And it's very real. I could almost see Daniel's face in that moment. The kind of shock that hits a person who grew up believing he was the most successful child in the family, only to suddenly discover that the sister he had always looked down on had gone much farther than he ever imagined. My father tried to regain some balance. Emma never really explained any of this to us. Eleanor Bennett answered immediately. Maybe because you never asked? That was the sentence that silenced the whole room. Short, cold, precise. My mother flushed red. That's not true. Emma has always been very private. Evelyn looked at her for a moment. This morning I asked Emma whether she had any connection to the Carter family in this city, she said. She just smiled and said Carter is a very common last name. The room fell silent. That sentence weighed more than an accusation, because it meant that when I stood in front of the greatest opportunity of my life, I had not chosen to use my family as support. I had chosen to separate them from my name, and everyone understood why. Jonathan Bennett spoke again, but everything he said only made it worse. I'd heard Emma was very good at this. Wasn't she the one who handled the last-minute crisis at the charity event in Silver Pines? Eleanor nodded slowly. And the gala in Seabrook last year, too. I had no idea that company was Emma's. Another guest pulled out a phone, then another. Within minutes, the entire room was murmuring pieces of information about me. Photos of me standing in front of hotels, industry interviews, projects in Brook Hollow, a video of me speaking at a conference. Everything my family had never once asked about was now being read aloud by other people in their own living room. I think that was the part that hurt my parents most. Not that I had succeeded, but that their community knew before they did. Daniel was the first to walk out. Someone later said he went into my father's study and slammed the door. Olivia disappeared upstairs right after him. Elaine still tried to keep the rest of the evening from falling apart, but from the moment the name Emma Carter was attached to $2.8 million, every gesture of politeness in that room became nothing more than useless theater. Evelyn set down her wineglass and said gently, "I have to say honestly, Emma Carter is one of the most impressive executives I've met this year." Then she turned to Victor and Elaine. "You must be very proud." Some sentences sound like praise, but in that moment, it was more like a mirror held directly in front of two people who had spent an entire lifetime looking in the wrong direction when it came to one of their children. My father said nothing. My mother answered softly, "We didn't know." Evelyn did not smile. "That is the saddest part." Then she excused herself and left early. No one could stop her. The moment the door closed behind Evelyn Moore, everything inside the Carter house exploded. The messages began flooding my phone almost immediately after that. "Mom, where are you? Call me right now." "Daniel, what the hell did you do?" "Dad, we need to talk tonight." "Mom, why did you let people find out like this?" Reading those messages, I laughed to myself on the hotel balcony. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. For years, when they dismissed me, it was called a misunderstanding. When they expected sacrifice from me, it was called duty. When I quietly built my own life, it was called nothing important. But the moment the truth humiliated them in front of other people, suddenly it became my fault. I didn't reply. I turned my phone face down on the table. Outside, the sea was black and still. Inside the hotel, a soft Christmas piano melody drifted through the air. For the first time in years, I spent the night of the 24th without watching an oven clock, without washing other people's dishes, without hearing someone tell me to hurry up. I ate slowly, drank slowly, breathed slowly. And even inside that relief, sadness still came. That is what no one tells you about setting boundaries with family. Even when you are right, it still hurts. Because what you lose is not only the old role, you also lose the illusion that one day, if you are better, softer, more self-sacrificing, they might finally see you. But that night, I finally understood something. If someone does not want to see you, you cannot live well enough to force them to. All you can do is walk out of the room where they have always insisted on keeping you in the shadows. Around midnight, Adrian called. "All signed? All signed. Are you okay?" I looked at the contract, looked at my phone screen still lighting up again and again. Then I answered honestly, "I'm hurting, but I don't regret it." Adrian exhaled softly. "Then you're moving in the right direction." After that call, I opened my laptop and wrote an email to my father, my mother, and Daniel. Short, clear, not emotional. Today I signed the contract with North Star Aviation. That is why I was not at dinner. For many years, I have been treated as the default person in the kitchen, the one who cleans up, the one who sacrifices her own work for family gatherings. That will not continue. If you want a relationship with me in the future, you will need to respect my work, my time, and my place in this family as an equal member, not as household staff. I will reach out when I am ready. I watched the email go through. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I only felt tired. A kind of exhaustion that reaches all the way to the bone, the exhaustion of someone who has finally cut away the rope that had been tightening around her for years. If you are hearing this, and there is a name in your life that makes you tense every time your phone lights up, if there is a house you step into and instantly get pushed back into an old role, then remember this: a boundary is not betrayal. It is the way a soul saves itself from being crushed again. But the story didn't end with the ruined dinner. Because the next morning, what collapsed for the Carter family was not just a party. It was the image they had spent years building. And in the middle of all that wreckage, the first person to send me a letter of apology was the one I had once believed never would. On December 26, the consequences began to spread. Not loudly, like a newspaper scandal. More like a crack in glass. At first, it was only a thin line. But once the light came through it, everyone could see it. North Star Aviation's post featuring the photo of me shaking hands with Evelyn Moore spread very quickly through the world of high-end hospitality and luxury service business. An industry magazine sent an interview request. 2 other corporations hinted that they wanted to meet. A partner who had hesitated for 3 months suddenly responded in a completely different tone. In less than 48 hours, Brook Hollow Hospitality had entered a new orbit. Adrian called it the turning point. I understood it more simply than that. When you stop shrinking yourself to fit other people's expectations, that energy returns to feed the life that truly belongs to you. But on my family's side, that same wave wore a different face. The Bennett family did not make a public scene. Families like theirs rarely do. They simply change the way they look at someone, the way they refer to them, the place they assign that person in their minds, and sometimes that is enough to shake an entire social standing. Jonathan Bennett was the first person to contact me. Not through my parents. Not through Daniel. Not through Olivia. He sent a professional email directly to Brook Hollow Hospitality's Partnerships Department. It began in a very proper tone. Miss Carter, after what I have recently learned about your work, I would like to speak with you directly regarding a hotel project in Silver Pines. I stared at that email for a long time, not because I was surprised he had reached out, but because until that moment, no one in my father's circle had ever looked at me through the lens of my profession first. Not as the Carter daughter. Not as Daniel's sister. Not as Emma, the one who cooks. But as Miss Carter, an executive. A woman whose role required respect. I forwarded the email to Noah and told him to schedule it through the standard process. No special treatment. No avoidance. Just professionalism. My father learned about it that same day. He called me 3 times. I didn't answer. That evening, a handwritten letter arrived at my apartment in Seabrook. I recognized his handwriting immediately. My father had never been a letter-writing man. Maybe because writing a letter forces a person to slow down long enough to hear what he truly thinks. I opened it. He wrote that over the past few days, he had been forced to look back at many things. That he had once believed he was a fair father. That he had always seen Daniel as the future because that was simply what he had grown used to believing. That he had never truly asked what I was doing with my life, only assumed that there was nothing remarkable there. And that the worst part was not that he didn't know I had become successful, it was that he didn't know, because he had never cared enough to ask. I read that letter 3 times. Not because it could erase 15 years, but because for the first time, my father had written something without defending himself. No if, no but, no, you should understand me too. Just a late acknowledgement. I set the letter down on the table and sat there for a long time, looking out at the city. I thought about all those years, when I had wanted just one sentence like that. Just one line, I see you. And now, it had finally arrived. But it arrived after I had already learned how to live without needing it. That is the bitterest part of growing older. Many of the things you want most do eventually arrive. They just arrive too late to keep their original meaning. My mother was different. Elaine didn't write a letter. She sent a few short messages, full of wounded pride. I never thought you could embarrass this family like that. You could have told me in a different way. I only wanted that evening to go well. Not one apology. Not one true admission. Just different versions of the same thing. She still saw herself as the biggest victim. Daniel was even worse. He sent a long message blaming me for ruining the most important night before the engagement celebration. Saying Olivia was shocked. Saying the Bennett family had been made uncomfortable. Saying that if I was that successful, I should have said something sooner. I read it and felt nothing but exhaustion. Someone who has been indulged for too long will always believe the problem lies in the way truth is delivered to them. Never in the way they treated people before they knew that truth. I didn't reply to Daniel. Instead, I called Grandma Jasmine. Her voice over the phone was thinner than it used to be, but it still carried a warmth that made my shoulders loosen instantly. I already know everything, she said. Rosehaven has had more gossip today than a year-end market. I laughed. The first real laugh I had had in days. I don't know whether I should forgive them. I admitted. Emma, she said very slowly, forgiveness does not mean going back and becoming a place where people can step on you again. You can forgive in your heart and still keep the door open only as far as feels safe. I closed my eyes. I'm afraid that if I soften, everything will repeat itself. Then don't soften in the old way, she said. Be soft with yourself, but with other people, be clear. That conversation made me decide to meet my father first. Just my father, not the whole family. We arranged to meet in the small garden behind Rosehaven on Sunday afternoon. I chose that place because Grandma Jasmine would be nearby. Some part of me still wanted the roots of kindness to exist somewhere around me. My father arrived early. He stood beneath the bare winter trees, wearing a dark coat with his hands in his pockets. He looked older than I remembered. Not because his hair had gone grayer, but because, for the first time, I saw him without that familiar armor of certainty. When I approached, he turned toward me. Thank you for coming. I sat down on the stone bench across from him. I came to be clear, not to pretend everything is fine. I understand. I was used to expecting resistance, avoidance, excuses. But that day, he simply sat there and listened. I spoke plainly. I told him I was no longer going to be the person who appeared only to cook, clean, and fill the emotional gaps in the family. That if I showed up at family gatherings in the future, I would come as a member of the family, not as staff. That my work would no longer be dismissed as little decorating jobs. That I would no longer tolerate mocking remarks about my age, my marital status, or the way I chose to live my life. That if Daniel or Elaine belittled me again, I would leave immediately, without explaining myself. My father listened for a long time before he finally said, "You're right. No defense. No wounded pride. Just that." My chest tightened in a strange way, because sometimes what we need most is not a beautiful speech. Sometimes it is simply a person who finally stops moving and stands still in front of the truth. Why didn't you ever ask me, even once? I asked. He looked out over the courtyard. Because I thought I already knew. He gave a sad little smile. I looked at Daniel and saw myself when I was young. I looked at you and saw something I didn't understand. So I convinced myself your life wasn't going anywhere. It turns out you weren't small. I was narrow-minded. A gust of wind moved through the trees. I'm not asking you to forget, he said. I'm only asking for the chance to do better with what remains. I nodded very slowly. I'm not promising much, but I can give one chance. Just one. When I stood up to leave, he called after me. Emma. I turned back. I'm proud of you. I looked at him for a long moment. But this time, I didn't fall apart because of those words. I simply gave a small nod. Maybe that was the clearest sign that I was no longer the girl who had once been starving for even a scrap of recognition. The following week, something happened that I never would have expected. My mother invited the whole family to Sunday dinner. Not at the penthouse. At a small private dining room in the Grand Marlowe Hotel. For the first time in her life, Elaine Carter ordered catering instead of automatically calling my name. I almost smiled when I heard that. Not because it felt like victory, but because sometimes a boundary becomes so clear that even the people who do not want to change are forced to change the way they behave. I arrived 5 minutes late. On purpose. And I walked in beside Grandma Jasmine. I had picked her up from Rosehaven. She was dressed in dark blue, with a cream shawl over her shoulders, her silver hair brushed neatly, her eyes bright with quiet pride. The entire room stood when they saw her. I noticed my mother falter for just a second. Perhaps because in Grandma Jasmine's presence, all of my mother's usual flourishes suddenly seemed unnecessary. The dinner felt strange. No one told me to stand up and refill glasses. No one asked me to go check on dessert. No one asked whether I could help clear anything. I sat at the table, in a real chair. In front of me were linen napkins, a wine glass, silverware, and the right to speak just like everyone else. On the surface, that sounds like something ordinary. But to me, it felt almost revolutionary. My father asked about Brook Hollow hospitality, for the first time, and he asked sincerely. I spoke about North Star Aviation, about guest experience strategy, about the project in Silver Pines. Jonathan Bennett listened intently. Eleanor Bennett looked at me very differently than she had before. Not warmly, exactly, but with respect. Olivia sat more quietly than usual. Daniel looked openly irritated, but for once no one rushed after him to soothe him. Halfway through dinner, My mother finally said the words she should have said a long time ago. Her voice was low. Emma, I was wrong. I looked up. She avoided my eyes for a second, then continued. I got used to thinking you would always be there, always taking care of everything. And I took that for granted. I didn't realize how much I was taking from you. It was not a perfect apology, but it was the most honest thing I had ever heard from her. I didn't hug her. I didn't cry. I didn't say, it's okay, because some wounds are only truly allowed to heal when we stop rushing to smooth them over just to make other people comfortable. I simply said, I hear you, and that was enough for that night. When dessert was served, Grandma Jasmine turned to look at me, the corner of her mouth lifting just slightly. She didn't say a word, but I understood. It was the look of someone who had waited a very long time to see me finally sitting where I belonged. That night, after I brought her back to Rose Haven, I lingered in the hallway. She took my hand. Do you see now? She said softly. You didn't need to shout to make them see you. I nodded. I just had to stop bowing. She squeezed my hand. Exactly. On the drive back to Seabrook, I thought about many things. About family. About forgiveness. About whether things would ever become perfect. The answer was no. Daniel was still bitter. My mother would still have days when she slipped back into old habits. My father might be sincere one day, and awkward the next. Real change does not come after one letter or one dinner. It comes through hundreds of small choices made afterward. But the most important thing had already happened. I was no longer willing to trade my self-respect just to keep stable a structure that had been built on my silence. If anyone had asked me what the greatest lesson of that Christmas was, I would have answered like this. It is not that success is the best revenge. I no longer like the word revenge. Because revenge means you are still living in orbit around the people who hurt you. What I did was something much different. I chose myself. I stopped asking permission to exist as a whole human being. I stopped bringing my achievements to people who only knew how to make them small. I stopped walking into other people's kitchens, hoping that this time, maybe, they would finally be grateful. From the moment I took off that apron, I did not merely leave a kitchen. I left behind an older version of myself, the version that believed love had to be earned through service. The version that believed if I gave a little more, bent a little more, suffered a little more, then maybe I would be seen, chosen, loved. Now I know this. Someone who truly loves you will never need you to erase yourself in order to make them comfortable. And if you have ever been an Emma in some kitchen of your own life, I hope you remember this. You were not born to remain in the background of someone else's story. You were not born to become the invisible part of your own home. You have the right to sit at the table, the right to be called by your true name, the right to be respected without having to sacrifice more of yourself to earn it. And sometimes, the biggest turning point in a life begins with one very small act. Put the apron down, open the door, and leave.